Okay, we're going to look at the male reproductive system. And I think I'll begin down here. This would be the scrotal sac, which is a bag-like structure between a guy's legs. Inside the scrotal sac would be, or scrotum, would be the two testes. So testes is the plural form. If you change the es to an is, it would be testis, and that's the singular form. So the testes in the scrotum, or scrotal sac, contain internally blind-ended tubes called the seminiferous tubules. And the seminiferous tubules serve as the site where spermatogenesis occurs to produce sperm cells. So the seminiferous tubules inside the testes within the scrotum are involved with the production of sperm by spermatogenesis. Between the seminiferous tubules inside the testes are cells called Leydig cells or interstitial cells. These are the cells that produce the masculinizing hormone testosterone. So the testes serve as the site of sperm production as well as testosterone production. The sperm cells that are produced by the seminiferous tubules inside the testes leave the seminiferous tubules and go into a highly coiled tube on the outside of the testis called the epididymis. The epididymis is a tube on the outside of the testis where sperm cells are stored. The epididymis begins at the top of the testis and then winds its way down along the edge of the testis to the bottom of the testis. At the bottom of the testis, the epididymis ultimately straightens out to become a long tube known as the ductus deferens. The ductus deferens is also known as the vas deferens, and I use these terms interchangeably. So the ductus deferens goes through a canal in the pelvic wall called the inguinal canal. It's over top the pubis portion of the coxal bone. As the ductus deferens emerges from the inguinal canal, it does so into the pelvic cavity. The pelvic cavity would be the lowermost region of the abdominal pelvic cavity. The ductus deferens merges with the duct coming out of the seminal vesicle to form what's known as an ejaculatory duct. And the ejaculatory duct opens into a tube draining the urinary bladder called the urethra. The urethra extends from the urinary bladder down the length of the penis, and the urethra opens at the end of the penis as the external urethral orifice. So a few other structures, and we might as well start off with the urinary system. So these would be the two kidneys, and the kidneys make urine. The urine produced by the kidneys drains out of the kidneys by way of tubes called the ureters, and the ureters carry urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder, where urine is stored. So there's a couple tubes here with similar names. One tube would be the ureter, going from a kidney to the urinary bladder, and there's two ureters, one per kidney. And the other tube with a similar name, but very different, is the urethra that drains urine from the urinary bladder down the penis to the outside of the body. There's a couple glands associated with the male reproductive system that you'll need to know. There's a paired set of glands called the seminal vesicle glands on either side of the urinary bladder. It's a duct draining out of the seminal vesicle gland that merges with the ductus deferens to form the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct is a very short duct that goes through the prostate gland and opens into the urethra. By the way, whatever I look at on one side, because of bilateral symmetry, is going to be true of the other side as well. In addition to the seminal vesicles on either side of the urinary bladder, there's a gland called the prostate gland, and it's found beneath the urinary bladder. So this isn't obvious, but the urethra actually goes through the middle of the prostate gland, not over its surface, as this drawing seems to indicate. And the ejaculatory ducts go through the prostate gland, where they open up into the urethra. Down from the prostate gland, but before you get to the outside of the body, would be two glands called the bulbourethral glands. And the bulbourethral glands empty their secretions into the urethra. So we're going to find that the seminal vesicles and prostate gland and the bulbourethral glands are involved with the formation of semen. We'll talk more about that later in the lecture portion of the reproductive system. So, hanging from the body wall is the penis, and it consists of a couple main parts. One is the body of the penis, the major portion, also known as the shaft. And at the end of the body or shaft of the penis would be an expanded portion known as the glans or the head of the penis. As I mentioned earlier, there's one opening at the end of the penis, and that's the external urethral orifice. So I think I've pretty much covered the basic anatomy of the male reproductive system. Let's look at a little more detail associated with the penis. So here would be the urinary bladder, and beneath the urinary bladder is the prostate gland. So I've used dashed lines here to indicate that the urethra goes through the middle of the prostate. You wouldn't actually be able to see it from the side. And then we see the urethra continue down the length of the penis and open at the end of the penis as the external urethral orifice. This would be ductus deferens coming up out of the scrotal sac through the inguinal canal, and it merges with a duct draining a seminal vesicle to form a ejaculatory duct that goes through the prostate gland after it forms and opens into the side of the urethra. Within the penis, there are columns of what are called erectile tissue. And these columns of erectile tissue are known as erectile columns. The erectile columns within the penis fill with blood when the penis undergoes a transformation and is transformed from a rather limp state to a hard rod that then can insert into the vagina during sexual intercourse. So there are 3 of these erectile columns. So I have these liquid chalk, and I'm going to use them to sort of represent the 3 erectile columns within the penis. The urethra goes through an erectile column called the corpus spongiosum, and above the corpus spongiosum that the urethra goes through are 2 additional erectile columns, and they're known collectively as the corpus cavernosa. If you change the A on the end of cavernosa, it becomes cavernosum, and that would be the singular form. So here's a corpus cavernosum, and there's the other corpus cavernosum. And the two together are the corpus cavernosa. So this would be like the corpus spongiosum that the urethra goes through, and these would be the other erectile columns above it. And all three of these erectile columns then run the length of the penis. The urethra has three sections. So the portion of the urethra that passes through the prostate gland is called the prostatic urethra. And then there's a section where the urethra is between the prostate and the corpus spongiosum. And this segment right here is called the membranous urethra. And then when the urethra travels through the corpus spongiosum within the penis, the section of the urethra there is called the spongy urethra. So I'm going to show you some illustrations and go through them that you'll find in the lab book as well as the Ammerman textbook. So this board is magnetic, and I'm going to just put up some enlarged illustrations that I got out of the lab book. So all of these would be associated with the male reproductive system. So here would be the scrotum, and within the scrotum or scrotal sac would be the testes. The testes, as you'll see on one of the illustrations, is covered by a whitish colored capsule known as the tunica albuginea. The testes make sperm cells, and the sperm cells leave the testis where they are stored in the epididymis on the outside of the testis. The epididymis goes along the curvature of the testis from top to bottom, and at the bottom of the testis it becomes the ductus deferens. So you can see the ductus deferens labeled here, because the ductus deferens actually starts here and then kind of goes behind all of this, and then we see it right here going up through the inguinal canal and into the pelvic cavity. The ductus deferens travels alongside the testicular artery, as well as an extension off the testicular vein called the pampiniform venous plexus. I don't care whether you know pampiniform venous plexus. It essentially is the testicular vein. So the testicular artery, testicular vein, and the ductus deferens together form what's known as the spermatic cord. This would be the shaft of the penis, and the expanded end is known as the glans or head of the penis. This would be the opening at the end of the urethra. In other words, the external urethral orifice. There's a muscle that we'll talk about during the lecture portion, known as the cremaster muscle. So I just point that out to you now. Okay, here we have a side view. So you can see the glans and shaft of the penis. This one also shows the erectile columns in color within the penis. Here would be the testis, and outside the testis would be the epididymis. And the epididymis starts at the top of the testis and comes down to the bottom, where it becomes the ductus deferens. And here's the ductus deferens coming up through the inguinal canal, and then the ductus deferens is going to join with the duct draining from the seminal vesicle to form the ejaculatory duct that goes through the prostate gland and opens into the urethra. The urethra extends from the urinary bladder all the way down the length of the penis and then opens at the end of the penis. There's several glands that make a solution known as semen, and those glands include the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, as well as the bulbourethral glands. So here's a front view of the male reproductive organs. And again, you can see the penis. This would be the body of the penis. Here's the glands or head of the penis. And then within the penis are columns of erectile tissue. And the corpus spongiosum, and there's only one of those, is the column of erectile tissue that the urethra travels through. And then above the corpus spongiosum would be two erectile columns that are collectively known as the corpora cavernosa. So the urethra has three sections. The section that passes through the prostate gland is the prostatic urethra. And then there's a short membranous urethra. And then finally, when the urethra passes into the corpus spongiosum, it's known as the spongy urethra. So this would be the testis, the epididymis, that becomes the ductus deferens, and the ductus deferens joins with the seminal vesicle to form an ejaculatory duct that travels through the prostate and opens into the urethra. So I think we've pretty much shown all of these features. The only one that might be a little confusing is the ductus deferens gives rise to the ampulla of the ductus deferens as it passes by the blue-colored seminal vesicle. And the ampulla of the ductus deferens resembles the seminal vesicle, but it's part of the ductus deferens. And the ductus deferens then becomes an expanded portion known as the ampulla of the ductus deferens. That again fuses with the duct coming out of the seminal vesicle to form the ejaculatory duct that goes through the prostate and then opens up into the urethra. This just shows some detail of the seminiferous tubules inside the testis. And the seminiferous tubules serve as a site where spermatogenesis produces flagellated haploid sperm cells. The sperm cells leave the seminiferous tubules and go into the epididymis. And the epididymis is where sperm cells are stored. The epididymis goes from the top of the testis to the bottom of the testis. And at the bottom of the testis, the epididymis becomes the ductus deferens. And then the ductus deferens travels with the testicular artery and the testicular vein as the spermatic cord. And it's the spermatic cord that goes through the inguinal canal, which is a tunnel within the pelvic wall, and emerges out of that tunnel in the pelvic cavity. That's the bottom portion of the abdominopelvic cavity. This glistening white capsule over the testis is known as the tunica albuginea. Okay, so I'm going to leave the illustrations and then we'll look at a model. And I think the model will give you a three-dimensional perspective of the male reproductive system. So this would be the tunica albuginea, or the white colored capsule over the testis. So this would be the testis inside of the scrotum or scrotal sac. Outside of the testis, but still in the scrotal sac, would be the epididymis. And the epididymis at the bottom of the testis gives rise to the ductus deferens. The ductus deferens goes through the inguinal canal, which is a tunnel of tissue over the pubis portion of the coxal bone, into the pelvic cavity. The pelvic cavity is the lowermost part of the abdominal pelvic cavity. And the pelvic cavity is formed by the coxal bones along with the sacrum and the coccyx. So you're going to see a couple tubes here, but this tube right here is just where the ureter from the kidney was cut off. So the kidney is drained by the ureter, and the ureter comes down, you pick it up here, and then opens into the urinary bladder. Beneath the urinary bladder is the prostate gland. And this that you see here would be a seminal vesicle. Of course, this is going to be the body or shaft of the penis, and the end would be the glans or head of the penis. So I can take this off, and now you're looking at the interior of the urinary bladder. And the urinary bladder is drained by the urethra. You can see here that the urethra is going through the middle of the prostate gland. And this little section of tube here would be the ejaculatory duct, going through the prostate gland and opening into the urethra. The urethra travels down through the corpus spongiosum, a column of erectile tissue within the penis, and the urethra opens at the end of the penis as the external urethral orifice. So these are the structures that we can see on this three-dimensional representation of the male reproductive system.